This is the Overton Pod. Hello, Kenthan.
How's it, John?
I'm well, and yourself?
It's been just such an extremely dull period. There's been nothing really of substance.
Yeah, I mean, that's
in the
why
world.
we haven't had a show, really.
Yeah.
We just felt, there's nothing really to talk about, and there's nothing happening. Of course, I've been very busy personally, so I haven't really been available to do a show. And I think, to apologize for that, I'm obviously going to refund half the subscription fees everyone paid last month for that. So my apologies.
And the other half we're going to be distributing evenly between which parties?
I already used the other half to attend the Bezos wedding in Venice, so I apologize in advance.
I was fascinated by the Bezos wedding.
Why?
The guy, clearly invited all of his close friends, so Leonardo
Sydney Sweeney.
Yeah, Sydney Sweeney, Leonardo DiCaprio, the Kardashians.
Yes, very close friends.
The Jenners, Oprah. I mean, they were there for him in the beginning when he founded Amazon in his garage, and they were helping him with seed capital. And
Yes, and telling him not to give up.
And telling him not to give up. And he celebrated by, hitting them with a swimming pool full of foam. It was,
On a yacht.
On a yacht, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I get it. I get the criticisms of all of that.
No, it's not criticism. John, let's be very clear. You and I are of the view that if people have earned their money, they have a right to spend it the way they want to.
Absolutely. So that's my point.
Yeah.
I also have very little interest in what people do with their personal lives. I don't really care. I get that Jeff Bezos is getting married to this woman, and people don't understand why or what's great about her, and they want to be interested in their wedding. And I'm just like, I don't care about any of this. I have no interest whatsoever.
I have no interest whatsoever in people's personal relationships. And I used to say this during the Zuma era, where people used to keep talking about Zuma's dalliances with various women who were young enough to be his daughters or even granddaughters. Mm-hmm. And my point was, no, I don't really care. Whatever consenting adults are doing is up to them. I just don't want him to be corrupt, and I don't want him to be stealing from the public coffers, and I want him to be doing his job. And as long as people are doing that, I think, we're absolutely fine. But what I found interesting was the fact that Bezos et al. Very clearly went out of their way to position this entire extravaganza in a way to extract maximum publicity and photo shoots and all of that. And I don't get that. It's something that doesn't quite...
I think there's a pathology that happens, and I call it a pathology. It probably may not be classified like that by a psychologist, certainly. But I think there's something that goes wrong in your brain when you're a billionaire. And I think you can see this in all of them, certainly the ones in the public eye. And that is, they've achieved kind of everything. They won the game, right? They beat the final boss, so to speak. And most of them haven't found God or a religion or something deeper. They're not generally very spiritual people, a lot of them. So Elon Musk thinks physics is God, which he's been saying on X for the last week or two. Jeff Bezos doesn't seem like a particularly religious guy. So they've won the game of life because they don't necessarily buy into there's something else I'm pining for after all of this. And what you have to do in life, well, you get born and then you're told you have to be a success, right? And what does success look like? Well, different things, but it definitely looks like having money and having wealth. And when you have wealth like that, you have power. Because money like that, billions of dollars, buys power to a point. You look at someone like Bezos, he attended the Trump inauguration. Now, he's no fan of Trump, and I'm sure he's never voted Republican in his life. But because he is who he is, he gets to attend that ceremony, and he gets to be on the inside, even though he's probably funded things against that party and perhaps even that person. So he wins at that. Women is usually relatively straightforward because you can find enough women who are more than happy to throw themselves at you when you have that level of financial success.
Well, I'll say this much though, in terms of Bezos, at least his wife is age appropriate.
True,
And
there is that, but
yeah.
it's just.
So it isn't like a DiCaprio thing in terms of.
No, it's not like a DiCaprio. And many of the other guys who end up dating really, and as you say, up to them and consensual adults. But it's a bit weird when a 60-year-old sort of kind of marries a 20-year-old. There's a weird sort of thing that goes on there, especially when they're so close to having been like off limits, I guess. They were teenagers a second ago,
sure.
and not consenting adults a second ago. But I just it's weird with the billionaires. They seem to then strive for other things, and sometimes those things are crazy obsessions. So Musk is Mars, and maybe that's not a crazy obsession, but it's certainly an obsession. Bezos, I don't know, but you pointing out this whole thing was a PR thing, there's no doubt you're right about that. Because the minute they were married officially, a Vogue cover got released, as if it was literally...
Which again, is there's an interesting backstory there as well, because the editor of Vogue has stepped down after 37 years.
Yes.
Yes.
It almost seemed like it was in protest.
Yes. Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if Condé Nast actually sold the cover.
Yes.
Yeah.
So just as I say, I don't really know what it is, but it seems to me that a lot of billionaires are still looking for something, as if they've won, as I said, the game of life. And now they have to find a new thing. Bill Gates does this as well. Bill Gates thinks he wants to be a dictator of the world in a subversive way. So he doesn't want to sit on a throne somewhere, but he wants to fund projects to remodel the world in the way he believes. So he funds projects around artificial beef, for example, because he thinks we shouldn't be eating cows any longer. He funds projects around certain public health issues because he believes that if he controls health in that way, then he can control populations, and he thinks that's best for humanity. There's this weird thing that happens with billionaires, and as I say, I think a pathology.
Yeah, but enough of that fun stuff. Speaking of billionaires, okay, so I'm just looking just now, just as of yesterday, okay, so Trump threatens Elon Musk. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Then he threatens Thomas Massey.
Yes.
Okay. Then he threatens a judge in Israel.
Yes.
Okay. And then he threatens the CEO of AT&T, the telecommunications giant, because he's not able to get his conference call going with several thousand people. Then he threatens Jerome Powell. Then he threatens Canada. And then he threatens Forbes magazine. Then he threatens Harvard. Okay, and then he launches this thing called Alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah, or Ron DeSantis did, but yeah, sure.
And at the same time, this is all in the past 24 hours, and he's released a new line of colognes.
Yes, the man's prolific, Kent. I don't know why people are complaining.
It's a gift that keeps giving. John, I cannot keep up with this guy. It is truly phenomenal. This entire Alligator Alcatraz thing. Okay, let's just tell people what it's all about. He's built in a remarkably short space of time, a very low-tech holding facility for illegal immigrants.
Sure.
Which is basically made up of cages wrapped in chicken wire that have bunks in them. Mm-hmm. Where
inside, tents that you would use for if you had a festival, for example. Those tents with the glass doors that they sort of install on the side.
Yeah,
air conditioning, whatever, because you've got to have it there.
Yeah,
tons of mosquitoes and the heat.
It's kind of what we are using in lieu of a parliament, right?
Yes, very similar.
Yeah,
very similar to what we use in lieu of parliament. We should also put cages in there.
Thank you. You see, now we these are practical steps that we can actually end up talking about. But anyway, so where do you want to start?
Well, I mean, there's so much. We did a lot on Trump last time. I think let's leave. We'll come to it because I did have a viewer ask who won the bet, and I don't think either of us did. But let's get to that at the end.
We had a bet.
We
Yes.
did have a bet, but we were wrong on process. So I'll tell you why I don't think either of us won.
This is your way of saying that you lost.
No, I think I won, but I think the winning was not a fair winning.
I think it's fair to say that if I took the bet, then I won.
Do you want to get to that now? Should I tell you why nobody won?
Just tell me what the bet was.
The bet was this one big beautiful bill, otherwise known as the OBBB, which is gone through the process in the States and is about to get passed by Congress. Essentially, it had gone through Congress, that the first vote, and you said it'll go to the Senate. The Senate will send it back to Congress for changes.
With changes,
That
which
was
they've done.
that was no. You said it for changes, for Congress to change it, not for Senate to change it. So that was the bet. Anyone can go back and listen. I don't want to hack this out. Here's why we were both wrong. Because I said that you said that they'll send it back to they won't take it as it is.
You're splitting hairs at this point.
Not
when I said the Senate was going to send it back.
Yes.
Okay. The changes have been made by the Senate, and they've sent it back with the changes.
You said the Senate would reject it, and that the Congress would make the House of the House, not the Senate. The House would make changes. So that's not what's happening.
No. So the Senate.
I don't want to argue about this. It's pointless. We're wasting our time.
And the House is now going to sign off on it, and with a bit of luck, it'll get passed by the 4th of July.
So yeah, it's anyone can go back and listen. But the point is I said the Senate would not send it back to the House to make changes, which they didn't. And
I'm saying that that's exactly what they did. The Senate made the changes and sent it back to the House, and the House is going to rubber stamp those changes.
So neither of those things happened or are going to happen, and I'll explain to you now why. Because the procedure was where we were was essentially that it had to pass the House.
All right, let's just cut to the chase.
It was always going to go to the Senate.
Okay, let's just cut to the chase.
And the Senate...
I will consider myself having won the bet because you bought me lunch today, and thank you very much for that.
You didn't win the bet.
A lovely lunch.
Please...
But let's.
I'm sure there are people who listen to the.
Let's focus on the substance of the stuff.
I don't want to go into the States right now.
Right.
I wanted to avoid this, so I'm going to leave it behind. And people who watch the show vociferously can find the time codes on the other one, can load it into the comments here, and then people can decide for themselves.
So the States ties in directly with a couple of other things we need to talk about.
Cool. Go for
we
it.
do need to touch on Iran and Israel.
We absolutely do, since there was a lot of things that happened in that area since we last recorded.
Okay, so just up front, I just want to say that I'm very pleased, because I have very close friends who live in Israel and came very close to being in the line of fire, and I'm very pleased to say that all of them pulled through that 12-day war without actually being injured themselves, and so I'm very grateful for that.
Okay.
Yes.
Are you also like Tucker Carlson, where you don't want anyone to die and all death is bad?
No.
Okay, good.
No,
You're a rational human being.
I'm a rational person.
Yes.
But I also believe, that in this particular instance,
yes,
the way in which, so let's just trace back to the events that actually took place. All right. So you had the Knesset was about to call a vote of no confidence in Bibi. All right. At that point, Bibi then went and negotiated behind the scenes and said, if you guys promise not to call the vote of no confidence, then I will not ensure the draft for people who are not currently eligible for being drafted. So that put a hold on that process. And at that point, Bibi was supposed to be back in court on his trials dating back from 2020. And what does Bibi do? He immediately preempts the process that Trump has put in place. And I'm very clear that Trump had put in place a process that was designed to kneecap Iran, prevent them ever getting a nuclear weapon. And
what process was that?
I'm very clear that behind the scenes, Trump was building a coalition in terms of all of the other Arab countries to bring them on board so that by the time he was able to get to brass tacks with Iran, that there would be no way whatsoever that they'd be able to continue with that process of enrichment. The issue that I have is that Bibi effectively preempted that entire process to the detriment of Israel. It was to the detriment of Israel because if there had been sufficient capacity to perform an all-out strike that was effectively going to decapitate all of Iran, it would have made perfect sense to do so. Instead, what he did was to squander a priceless resource. And the priceless resource that he had was all of the molds that were planted deep within the Iranian establishment. And I've got to say, hats off to them for the years of preparation that had gone into that type of thing. I mean, the level of intelligence that was there, and I'm saying it didn't need to be used at this point. It was the inappropriate time for it to be called, and that any attack that should have been taking place should have been coordinated upfront with the Americans in advance.
I disagree entirely.
I'm aware of that.
attack.
So I've said what I have to say in terms of this. So now let's take it from your side.
Yeah, I mean, my context is different. So I don't see what happened now in Iran as what happened now only. I know you've obviously referred to the years of intelligence and all of that, but that, as you point out, could have been used at any point. This all begins, yes, there's the local stuff around Bibi. I don't think it really matters, and I don't think he really cares. And I can get to why I say that if you really want. But the point is Bibi Netanyahu's, one of his fundamental goals, one of his primary reasons for existence has been, and his involvement in politics has been Iran. And he's been very clear on that.
Oh, he's been
through
very
decades.
He's been on script on that, going back
Decades.
to the 80s when he still had dark hair and
Yes.
yeah.
So he's he's been incredibly clear on that. I think that is more of a reason for why he may have been motivated and may have, as you're trying to point out, been motivated to do things at the wrong time. I don't think this is the wrong time. I think that maybe the outcomes are not what you want them to be.
Well, I'm saying that that's precisely the issue that I have.
It's the wrong timing. All right.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you why I don't think it's the wrong timing. So this started on October 7th, not by Israel's hand, but by Iran's hand in part and others. And that led to what we've seen over the past almost 3 years. It's almost what we've seen, which is first the Gaza war, then Hezbollah falling essentially in Lebanon. Remember, there was a point at which it was very much believed that Hezbollah was going to start a war on a second front while Israel was engaging with Hamas, and that was actually going to lead to a major problem for Israel. And that never occurred. And in fact, Hezbollah was taken out largely by the pager, what would you call that, operation? And then by other events that occurred in Lebanon and then Syria. And then what happened in Syria, which is really fascinating, and I think we're one of the few places I've seen this discussed. I mean, you and I have discussed this, but I haven't seen it discussed much else, which is the masterclass that Israel has run in Syria in terms of dealing with what could be a very foreign force and anti-Israel government to them, but hasn't turned out that way yet, number one. So the diplomacy has been superb.
Well, not only the diplomacy, but let's, if you look in terms of the other really significant thing that's happened over the past week, which is the Golan Heights.
Yes. So, so territory.
Yes.
Now, not Golan Heights is old news, but obviously it's very important. So I get where you're coming from.
Yeah. So it's been de facto under Israel control,
yes,
but now
and dispute.
Yes, but now, in exchange for normalizing of relationships, there's an agreement on the part of the current Syrian regime to hand their territory over to Israel, which is a huge win.
Right, but it's equally what they did was they when that Syrian regime fell, they went and destroyed a lot of air defenses, and we discussed this at the time.
Yes.
And they also took a streak of land that ran up into, almost in a straight line, runs up into Syria, but gives them an elevated position not only over sort of Syria, but towards Iran. Okay. And then there were, and this goes back to the time when Israel struck a whole bunch of the air defenses of Iran. It was around the same time, and this was all forward planning to what's recently happened. And then Iran sent those drones. There were some videos of those sort of hundreds of drones, some getting caught in telephone wires on the way in Jordan and places like that, being helped by countries like Jordan, by the US, etc., to shoot a lot of those out the sky. But very rudimentary drones. And then we get to this point now where the IRGC has been decapitated. I acknowledge that they can be rebuilt because Khamenei is still in charge and that regime is still in charge. But they really have decapitated the IRGC. And importantly, on the eve.
You see, I disagree with the decapitated part.
Okay.
Because it's kind of like
a multi-headed snake.
Yeah. It's
or it grows back. It's a lizard. But what's happened is you're coming from the angle of Trump had something in his back pocket is going to prevent them from enriching. I don't see what that is, by the way. But
I'm actually going one step further. I'm saying that Iran has actually emerged stronger as a result of this.
I think the complete opposite. So what I think has happened is Israel has proven that Iran is a paper tiger. And in so doing, they've done that on the precipice. So from my perspective, they've proven that Iran's a paper tiger, that Israel is the dominant military force.
Have you seen the footage coming out of Tel Aviv in terms of flattened buildings, in terms of the sheer destruction?
Yeah,
no,
because let me get to Tel Aviv. Let me just finish the sentence.
Yes.
Iran ends up as the paper tiger. Israel proves that it is the dominant military force by a long way, not by a small way, by a very, very long way in the Middle East, to the point that it can destroy multiple enemies over the period of 2 years.
So the question of Israel being the dominant force has never been in doubt.
Well, hold on.
No,
they're doing that on the eve of signing peace deals and relationships with traditional enemies. And so the Abraham Accords are now going to become basically a complete domination over the Middle East. Okay? Essentially, Israel is going to be a country of like any else in the Middle East, and all the other countries are just going to work with them. Oman, Saudi Arabia, you name it. Okay, and so that to me was a good move, because to me that puts Israel in a very strong position.
But John, everyone has agreed for the longest time that Israel has been the dominant military force, and Israel still is the dominant military force.
I think if you were Saudi Arabia before this...
the point where you and I... No, I don't rate the Saudis at all.
It's about thought.
And you can look at the Saudis in terms of the number of bodies that they have on the ground, and I don't rate the Saudis very highly at all. And
but what's the population of Saudi Arabia, Captain?
And I think back to the days of P.J. O'Rourke.
Yeah,
who was embedded during the time of the Iraq wars, and he came back with in the way that only P.J. O'Rourke could write about this stuff, and talked about the overall lack of discipline on the part of the Saudi forces back then, and complete inability to pull together as a cohesive unit, all of that type of thing. So let's just pull back, okay?
Yeah.
So I think we're all in agreement that Israel is the most powerful military force in that area. The point at which I'm saying that Iran has not established itself as a paper tiger is that it's shown that it actually has the capacity, should it choose to do so, to actually flatten Israel.
I don't think that was shown at all.
And I'm very clear based on all of the footage that I've seen. And remember that Israel imposed a complete blackout in terms of stuff being sent out, in terms of what's happening on the ground. The only reason why a lot of us have access to that stuff is because we have friends and family in Israel who are actually sending pictures of stuff that was happening on the ground. And we were able to see close up what's actually happened in terms of buildings collapsing and so forth. Just in terms of the sheer logistics, no matter how technologically superior Israel is, and certainly it is, just in terms of the sheer volume of missiles that can be lobbed across, there is no way that one can actually create a defensive shield that's going to be able to protect a country of the size of Israel from multiple attacks from various. And the reason why I'm saying that Iran has emerged stronger as a result, yes, I'm very clear that their capacity to enrich uranium and produce a nuclear weapon has been severely degraded. But has their conventional weapon capability been shown to be isolated to the extent that they no longer pose a threat? No, if anything, I think at this point, Iran has actually shown, if you look in terms of the progression of when missiles were launched over that 12-day period, and they were missiles of increasing complexity.
I'm going to call what you're seeing, I'm going to call it the Johannesburg effect.
Tell me about the Johannesburg effect.
I'm going to call it the Johannesburg effect. So I've seen some of the footage, probably similar stuff to what you have. Sure, there's buildings that were blown out mostly. I didn't see. There were some collapsed, smaller structures, but the high rises in Tel Aviv certainly were not. None of them collapsed.
Could it possibly be because Iran was being very specific about what it was targeting?
No, it couldn't have been.
I knew you were going to say that.
Because there are 5-story apartment blocks which were completely blown out from a rocket landing on or next to them. But the Johannesburg effect is that you've gone into downtown Joburg, you've gone corner Loveday and Jeppe Street or whatever it is, and it looks like an absolute.
All right, I see what
it
you're
looks like an absolute hole. And I've said to you, assess Johannesburg based on what you see here, and you've gone, wow, this is terrible. But I haven't then put you in a car and taken you to outside, the offices of Anglo American or Standard Bank.
And one could make out the same case in terms of Tehran right now.
Well, Israel didn't target civilian sites, except again, where there were military personnel.
And again, one could argue that the Iranians are saying exactly the same thing. And you will argue, no doubt, that the Iranians are not built that way and they think differently. But my point very specifically is, do they have sufficient...
It's not about built. I have evidence. Look, do
they have
the Iranians are happy to kill Israeli civilians. They state that openly because they see them, not just the military, as hostiles. Okay, so that's very clear to me.
But at the same time, remember that Iran, in this current iteration, is walking a very delicate line. Mm-hmm. And in as much as I'm agreeing with what you're saying in terms of their... it's been their stated goal to have destruction of the state of Israel for the longest time. Mm-hmm. So let's just park that aside.
Sure.
But the way in which that actually gets implemented has to be viewed against the backdrop of the fact that Iran, at the same time, cannot afford to lose its current lifeline, and its main lifeline is with China, because a plurality, if not a majority, of the oil supply that goes to China comes from Iran, and ditto in the case of their relationship with Moscow. And can they actually afford to be seen as an entity that is deliberately targeting civilians from the perspective of those countries, not from the perspective of Israel, not from yours? And there is a game that is being played right now because they need that lifeline in order to stay in the family of nations. And that's why. That's why they're
my response to that would be that fundamentalists don't think as logically as you, because they may think, I'm not saying they're incapable of thinking on that level of logic. I'm saying that they will ultimately go to their fundamental goal and they will say, what do we want more? Do we want to keep China on side and Russia on side? And indeed, logically, these are the things we need to do. Or do we want to destroy the state of Israel? And it's a fundamentalist belief. One other thing I do want to say is, yes, Israel on paper was the strongest military power in that region, obviously. Just like America on paper is the world's military superpower, amongst other things. However, anyone listening to us who says to me they think of the US military in the same way now, after what they did with their B-2s, as they did the day before they did that with their B-2s, is lying to me. Because it's not always about what's on paper. It's about what you can achieve and show other people you can achieve. Okay? And so that's what I believe has occurred here with Israel's military.
So let's not conflate issues. Okay? The B-2 strike capability has always been a strength of the U.S. The Moabs have always been a strength of the U.S. You know, it was the reason why they were needed to be called in order to take out those nuclear sites.
But words and actions, Kent.
No. So if we do a comparison in terms of the capabilities of ground forces, I would say that if you put, and I'm talking about personnel as opposed to the tech that's at their disposal. I'm saying, for example, that if you took a unit of U.S. ground troops and put them up against Indian ground troops or Chinese ground troops, the Americans would come off worse for wear. And I'm saying that I think there's a very strong likelihood it's going to change now that Hegseth has moved in and is once again hoping to reinstate that sense of grit that used to be there with the U.S. military for the longest time. But it's also very true that from the Obama era up until now, there's been an overall degradation in terms of the quality of soldiering that's been on the ground on the part of the U.S. But let's park that.
This is all subjective, though.
No,
it's conjecture.
It is.
And what I'm saying
it is conjecture. But
here's what I'm saying.
Remember, the U.S. have never fought a ground war.
Well, they haven't won one since World War II.
But they've never fought a ground war.
Is that completely correct?
No, they've never fought a ground war. So everything that they've done so far has been at the level of using massive air superiority and missile capability, and then sending in troops after the fact as a mopping up operation. And we use Iraq as a very specific example. Okay, you had incessant bombing runs which took off from the UK, and they had non-stop circuitous bombing routes where the bombers would fly all the way to Iraq, drop a load, turn around and go back. Because remember that the in-between countries in the Second Iraq War had not allowed those planes to be landing at the time. Those bombing runs continued incessantly. You know, in fact, the Iraqis were in a position to set their clocks by it because they knew how long it would take once the bombers had taken off from the UK, headed off towards Iraq and turned around. Then there were the Tomahawks that were launched basically from sea. And at the point at which the Iraqi army was almost completely degraded, the U.S. ground forces moved in with bulldozers. And they literally bulldozed the Iraqi troops into the ground. They literally pushed sand and covered them.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that I think America has engaged in ground wars repeatedly. Yes, obviously they've used their air force as well as their navy. But I would say the Gulf War, was very much a ground war. Yes, there was obviously an airborne component, but that was when you got journalists embedding themselves. I remember watching the footage of journalists on tanks.
Air superiority was absolutely a thing that. But remember,
but air superiority can exist in a ground war. Those two things are not mutually exclusive.
So what I'm saying is that what has changed significantly from that time to now is that air superiority depended on one having access to aircraft carriers. And the issue right now in terms of aircraft carriers is two things. The one is that an aircraft carrier cannot turn quickly enough to avoid hypersonic missiles. That's the first thing. The second thing is, no matter how technically capable the actual aircraft are, those aircraft can be swarmed by inexpensive drones.
Sure.
It's the equivalent of bird strikes.
I hear you. But
so what I'm saying is that the logistics of war have moved.
You said this before on the thing, and I fine. I'm not going to argue that, yes, you could theoretically swarm an F-35 with a whole bunch of drones and you would probably down the F-35. The problem with that claim is that we've just proven that that didn't happen. So until that happens, and again, this is the point I'm making about action and theory and words, right? So, yes.
So remember the reason why it didn't happen, okay? It's because of the fact that Israel had the ability on the ground at the time to take out everything that would have made air defenses around Tehran
But
possible.
cheap drones, Canthan. They didn't take out cheap drones.
Yeah,
There's no evidence that Israel took out cheap drones.
They didn't take out cheap drones, but the ability to actually deploy those drones in response becomes a critical a piece of the puzzle. There were clips of people, from the Iranian side, looking with amazement at the fact that Israel was enjoying air superiority over the city, and was literally picking and choosing targets.
Correct.
But what I'm saying is that very specific point was entirely dependent on the fact that Israel had access to those molds that had been planted there and carefully nurtured. And I'm saying that this was the wrong time to have expended those resources.
Okay, and so we will wait and see if you are correct or I am correct. My personal view...
No, I don't think it's a question of... it is a value judgment at this point. And I think I'm making a value judgment, you as well. I think it was the wrong time for Israel to have expended those resources. And I think that the gains that they got in exchange for those resources were not as substantial as they could have been if they had actually held those resources in abeyance. Look, the other point that...
I think those gains are massive. Can I list them?
So, no, I do want you to list them.
Okay.
I just want to make one more point. That the other reason why Iran will not flatten Israel, unless they're at the point where they know that there's nothing else left to do, is because Iran knows that if they do flatten Israel, then they become a nuclear wasteland.
Yeah, according to their religion, they don't care. I'm talking about people who know
That's not
this.
the point. That's I know you think of them as irrational. I think that...
Well, from my perspective.
I think that...
They're completely rational from their perspective.
So I think that if you look at any given power structure, the power brokers are always inherently rational. And they...
Rational is can be thrown many different ways, Kenthan. I'm gonna Godwin's law this and tell you that Hitler was completely rational from his perspective.
And you know that as soon
that's
as
not to say that
John,
I think he was
as soon
rational.
as we bring Hitler into any discussion,
Yes.
things fall apart. Because any comparison with that just becomes
Pol Pot was rational. Mao was rational.
Okay,
Which genocidal dictator would you like me to refer to? They were all rational from their perspective. They had reasoning for doing what they were doing. They believed they were going to make their nation and possibly the world in some instances better places.
So
history shows that's not true.
So are the Ayatollahs aware of the fact that if they do resort to flattening Israel, that it effectively means the end of Iran? I think the answer to that is yes.
I also think it's yes.
And is that a trade-off?
The difference we disagree on is do they care? I don't think they care.
I'm saying they do care.
No,
I'm saying that they do care. And I'm saying that's a very rational decision on their part.
If they cared, Kent, then why were they enriching at 60%? Why? Why do that?
So can we talk about what's actually needed to get up to the point at which one is able to produce a nuclear weapon?
Go.
And the second thing is, are they signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty? Yes, they are. What are they allowed to enrich to under the NPT?
Not 60%.
Absolutely, they are.
Not 60%.
Absolutely,
They're
they are.
allowed to enrich to 4%.
No. Absolutely not. Are you going
My phone is coming out, and I'm going to prove you wrong.
Okay.
Well, I know this because I looked it up the other day.
Okay,
but
you're going to
I'll
Google
find
it
the
at
source
this
for you
point.
with pleasure.
Okay, so we'll come back to the source later. But now you were going to go through the list of things.
Of what Israel got out of the deal.
Of what Israel got out of the deal.
Okay, so we're all over the show here, but I do want to point out that I think this war just proved your whole, the drones are going to take over and the drones are all you need. Completely wrong. I think America showed and Israel showed that having bombers, sort of fifth generation fighters, etc., all of these things, I think they proved that you actually currently need those things in the current state of warfare. On the day where a nation like Iran could have launches a whole bunch of drones and an F-35 and downs it, I will then turn around and go, yeah, warfare has changed. But so far it hasn't. No one's shot a hypersonic at an aircraft carrier or any ship for that matter. And let's see the warfare change. But the warfare that was just used is the warfare that would be considered modern traditional warfare, and hey, it worked. What Israel got out of the deal is they exerted dominance, regional dominance, showed not on paper, but in reality, how powerful they are militarily, and that anyone who wants to cross them might want to think twice. And they did that at the moment they were about to become friends with almost everyone in the region except Iran. And I think that and of course, they got Iran's nuclear weapons, at least for now, and I would estimate probably 10 years, are off the table. And so the next time Iran gets to the point that they were getting to, which we're about to get into, whether you believe they were even going to make nukes, you seem to disagree on that. But
so the single biggest
but they will have everyone in the region as their friend.
So the single biggest reason why I believe that they were not about to get nukes.
Yeah.
Okay, is because up until literally the last moment, all of the U.S. intelligence, all of the atomic agency intelligence said that they were in exactly the same position where they were 20 years ago, which is that if they decide to start producing nukes today, they are 3 years away. And that's exactly where they've always been. And the reason why I'm very clear that they were not about to be developing a nuke is because of the fact that the Ayatollahs have still not rescinded that fatwa. And you remember that the Ayatollahs have a fatwa against producing nuclear weapons. And and given your respect for their sense of fanaticism, are you saying that as the religious fanatics that they are, they have put out a fatwa purely on the basis of the fact that they are going to lie about it? I'm saying no. I'm saying that at the point at which the Ayatollahs rescind the fatwa, and remember the point around the fatwa was the Ayatollahs claimed that producing nuclear weapons would be un-Islamic from their perspective. Now, clearly I know that you're not going to believe them when they say that. I, on the other hand, take the view that the Ayatollahs take their fatwas very seriously.
You know what I know, Kenton, is they may take their fatwas very seriously, but I also know that they took burying a facility 200 meters under a mountain very seriously.
Yes.
And I don't know why you would do that for a peaceful nuclear program. No one else does that. No one else buries it. The only other thing that's buried that deep under a mountain is NORAD, which is basically America's doomsday shelter for if they do get attacked by nuclear weapons. That's where they're going to evacuate the president and the whole of Congress and a few select members of the population. So you don't build that for no reason. You don't need bombers to drop these massive weaponry on a hole the size of a washing machine to get rid of something that's allegedly banned by a fatwa. And so that's my take on that. I did look it up, by the way. General enrichment, 3 to 5%, so 4% wasn't far off. Under the IAEA, you're allowed to enrich for civilian purposes up to a maximum of 20% enrichment. The IAEA, which is a UN organization hardly on side with any Western country, frankly, and has defended Iran repeatedly previously, released a report a couple of months back.
And of course, the Iranians have an entirely different view on the IAEA, on the basis that the reason why the US was able to target the Iranian facilities with such precision was precisely because of the fact that all of that data was given to them by the IAEA.
Maybe.
So, yeah.
But the point is, they released a report to say that they were enriching at 60%. Please tell me why they would need to enrich at 3 times the levels.
You see, the question for me is whether, in terms of the rules of engagement under the NPT, they were allowed to enrich to that point.
They're not. That's what it says. It says you're allowed to go up to 20% as an absolute maximum.
No, you're talking about the atomic, the
NPT. No, I'm talking about the NPT. The NPT says 20%. Now, I didn't know we were specifically going to argue about the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is why I had to go look it up.
Which is the reason why Iran is now threatening to withdraw from the NPT, which basically means that
who cares?
Who
cares? They were gonna build a nuke. Are you sorry? Just so we're on the same page. Are you denying that Iran was going to try and build a nuke at some point in the next? I'll give you a time limit in the next 5 years.
I am saying that Iran has always been 3 years away from building a nuclear weapon for the past 30 years.
Yes, and I'm saying that for the past 30 years they haven't had 60% enriched uranium.
And the question is, what has actually changed between now and 10 years ago?
Well, there's a couple of things that happened. One was the deal Obama made with them, and then gave them a whole bunch of cash, which they then pumped into terrorism across the region and Europe, I might add. Okay.
Look.
And then, wait.
I don't want us to conflate issues simply because, on the one hand, you've got my track record of my complete contempt for the Ayatollahs and everything that they've done for that country.
Yes, I know you're not defending the Ayatollahs.
No, and their track record in terms of their misogyny and in terms of the sheer barbarity of lots of practices that have taken place under their watch. But I also take the view that you either have a system where you're imposing a set of rules across the board that you hold all people accountable by, and or you completely toss that out, in which case I'm all for a situation where you agree that if you have the military capacity, you go out of your way to take out your enemies once and for all, and toss out the entire concept of anything such as international peace treaties, and let's just go back to a point where it's going to be winner takes all.
Okay, but what does that have to do with you, whether you believe they were trying to build a nuke or not?
It's not a question of whether I believe they were trying to build a nuke or not. I've already said I don't believe they were trying to build a nuke. Okay, I've said as much on the basis that they've always been in that position where they've been 3 years away from a nuclear weapon.
But except in a court of law. Yes. So if we were to take Iran to a court of law and we were to say, you are charged with violating the Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Who is on Who's on the jury?
Hold on. I'm not going to tell you who the jury is. I'm not going to tell you who the judge is. I'm just going to lay out the circumstantial evidence, right? And then we can decide whether they've always been 3 years away or whether they were in fact 3 months away. Okay. And the difference is that what do we have now? We have the evidence that we've always had, right? This genocidal language towards the United States, towards Israel.
But that's not new.
Okay, hold on. That's always on the table, has always been on the table, correct. We've had this intent to build nuclear weapons in some respect, in that they've got nuclear scientists doing things in secret, etc., and they need the IAEA, and every now and again they get a slap on the wrist. Okay, that's old. I agree. All right. What we do have that's new is secret nuclear facilities. What we do have that's new is nuclear facilities buried hundreds of meters under the ground. What we do have that's new is enrichment to a level that is never... John. 60%.
We knew about that 5 years ago.
No, we
knew
did
about that last year.
We didn't. The IAEA report about 60% came out about 2.5 months ago. All right, that was what triggered a lot of the stuff, and I think that's probably what caused Netanyahu to decide. All right, it's time.
Now, and I'm saying that what caused Netanyahu to do this was the fact that he did not want to be appearing in court.
Yeah,
what's coming out of that now, and the reason why Trump is now pushing for the charges against Netanyahu to be dropped, which I agree with, by the way, because I think that what that does is it removes an unnecessary reason for Netanyahu to be continuing to involving himself in wars simply because of the fact that it keeps him from going to jail. Remember that that the arguments in Netanyahu's trial, the prosecution rested, in June last year. Netanyahu has his testimony, which is effectively the case for defense, has been prolonged multiple times. In December, he put it off on the basis that he was in poor health. Previous times, it's been because of the fallout from October 7th. And now, of course, this particular time, it was because of the fact that there was a war with Iran. So do I believe that Bibi Netanyahu is using what I call the Zelensky approach, which is to keep prolonging conflict simply because it prevents him from going to jail? I think the answer to that is yes.
And I don't think it matters because, firstly, I don't believe any of that.
No, I'm saying it matters. And I'm also
making... But it doesn't matter because when Bibi Netanyahu is gone, 20 years from now, he'll be dead in the ground, whether he goes to jail or not. Okay. And Iran, assuming the Ayatollahs are still in charge, which they may very well be, because the Iranian people don't seem to want change enough. It's just like the South Africans, same problem. And in 20 years' time, nothing will have changed. And Bibi will be dead. And the Ayatollahs may still be in charge, still saying the same thing to Israel.
So you realize the point at which we're differing right now.
And what I'm saying is that the same issue will exist, and there may be another war that happens, or there may be more conflict. There certainly will be more conflict over the next 20 years.
You and I are in agreement on all of that, except for one sticking point. And the one sticking point is that I'm making.
Yes.
Okay. And you're going to have a hard time refuting this, which is that the reason why the timing of this particular conflict happened is precisely because of the fact that Netanyahu was supposed to be back in court that week.
Okay, and I've heard you say that, and I made my point.
And am I in agreement that the conflict will still be there in 20 years' time? Yes.
I made my point about why I don't believe that and why this is a whole timeline that started quite a long time ago. Firstly, generally for Bibi decades ago, and secondly for Israel on this particular trajectory after October 7th. And the audience, let them decide what they believe
Sure.
and whether they think Iran was interested in developing a nuke or not. I imagine those who spend a lot of time...
Look, John, you know fully well that if it's a toss-up between Team Iran or Team Israel,
sure,
I'm going to be Team Israel every time.
I've got you.
At the same time, if it's a toss-up between Team Bibi or Team Israel, again, I'm Team Israel. And do I believe that what Bibi did this time around was not in the best interests of Israel? Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to push back against that comment, which is that Bibi is not a dictator. Okay, and that the people in Bibi's cabinet are not made up entirely of people from Likud, which is his party. All right, they are made up of people from his coalition, and he requires those people, including the people in the defense ministry and in the those in the intelligence services, etc., who some of which are career people, some of which are politicians, some of which are pro him, some of which are not his party, although they may be on the right. This is not a decision. He doesn't go and say we're attacking Iran. Okay, so that would be my only pushback against that.
Does he have the power as an individual to launch military action? The answer is yes.
Sure, he does, but he needs needs the approval. He needs the tacit approval.
Is it also true that immediately at the point at which one is a state of war, people pull together around the leadership of the country? Absolutely.
Yeah, but he started the war against Iran.
Yes,
Israel started that war.
Yes, I know.
I mean, there's arguments about how Iran started it by proxy.
In the absence,
you get what I mean.
Yeah, but in the absence of him launching that attack, would people have preferred that he see out his trial? I think the answer to that is yes.
The trial is, if you want to talk about the trial, and you obviously know a fair amount about it, but the thing I would say about the trial is not different to what Trump had happened to him in the United States.
So
and
you
it's
think
not different.
You think it's lawfare.
And it's not much different to what's happened to Marine Le Pen in France. It's not different to, essentially he's accused of taking gifts. Okay? He's accused of taking gifts he shouldn't have taken, and then that's influenced decisions. That's the argument that's being made. And it's...
hence my saying that Trump wanted was making threats against the Israeli judge and wanting it to be dropped. Yes, yeah, but it's bribery, fraud, breach of trust.
Yeah, it's in the overall scheme of things, it's nonsense. And to be honest, a lot of the stuff is driven by what's left of the left in Israel. That's why you had those protests over the changes to the judiciary prior to October 7th.
No, those I'm very clear that was part of the
that was
part of the entire globalist playbook.
100% it was.
And we
but
spoke about
a lot
that
of the
at the time.
stuff,
Yeah.
all the anti-Bibi stuff. You need to understand Bibi's position in Israeli politics. His position in Israeli politics is one of immense power. He's an incredibly influential, incredibly powerful politician who's dominated that space for basically 2 decades.
Oh yes,
and so the want to bring him down is huge, massive. What has happened with him in the political scene in Israel has changed the face of Israeli politics. It is not what it was in the 90s. It's almost a different country in many respects. And so there's a lot of want to bring him down to size and to get rid of him. And to me, that's what the trial is about. It's again, show me the man and I'll show you the crime. I guarantee you there isn't a politician in the public eye at a high level who hasn't done something you could nail them on. And that's what they're doing to him. That's fine. They might get it right.
But you see, it's a question of whether it's a Gupta level of corruption or whether it is
standard run of the mill.
Exactly. Yes.
Okay. Good. Shall we? I'm going to leave that to the audience to decide.
So let's
decide where they stand.
Let's leave it to the audience to decide. And shall we pull it back home?
Yeah, let's do that because, man.
Yeah, let's pull it back home. So, of course, let's just talk about the fact. Shall we then? Let's just zoom back to the fact that the U.S. has come back to South Africa and said, "Here are the following things that we want you to fix in order for us to normalize."
Well, I'm more interested in just first to talk about how we found that out, because the South African government has known about these 4 things.
Yes.
For weeks, apparently.
Absolutely.
And didn't tell us.
Yes.
Didn't tell the media, or the media decided to not ask, or the media decided to keep quiet. Any of those are possible. Knowing our media, they probably know and are protecting the ANC. That's the most likely outcome. But they've known for weeks and haven't told us. We end up finding out because people from the Freedom Front and from Agri, I think it wasn't Agri, it's the other group, but the farmer representatives essentially go to the US, and I apologize for forgetting your guys' names, but I don't have it in front of me. And they went to the US and they had conversations with the Americans, and the Americans said, but we've told the government that these are our 4 conditions. And they were kind of flummoxed and then came back to South Africa and were like, well, the Americans told us there's 4 conditions, for which they then got panned by the media.
Well, as of today, we know that the Ramaphosa regime has now asked for an extension.
They're not going to get it.
They're not going to get it, yeah.
Trump's made it very clear by this date, or there's a set tariff. And that set tariff is probably going to be somewhere between 25 and 40%. What are the 4 conditions? You have it in front of you.
I don't have it in front of me.
Okay, so the one of them is that for all American companies, basically BEE needs to be scrapped.
Yes.
So there can be no non-tariff trade barriers.
Yes.
Essentially is how it's worded, and they consider BEE to be a trade barrier, which is correct. It is a trade barrier. The other things that they want is the chanting of "kill the farmer, kill the boer" to be condemned by the ANC.
Well, let's just start in order of priority. As I recall, that they want farmer tax to stop as the...
Well, they want it as a priority crime. Now I'm remembering all the things.
I think at the top of
they want it as a priority crime listed by the government and for the police, in fact, for the Scorpions to investigate. I mean, that was the wording I saw.
Not the Scorpions, the Hawks.
Sorry.
The Scorpions were
I'm stuck in 2014, Captain.
Scorpions were disbanded by Zuma, yeah.
Yeah, and employed by the private sector to investigate people for insurance fraud.
So they want the ANC to publicly condemn and distance themselves from Kill the Boer.
Yes. They want so they want they want the BE thing, and then the fourth one. I can't for the life of me remember.
Expropriation only take place with compensation.
That's it. Yes, expropriation can only happen with compensation, and once all legal modalities have been exhausted. Essentially. So those were the four conditions.
I think fair market value was...
that's not bad. We remembered that off the top of our heads.
Yeah,
I'm quite impressed.
Yeah. But I mean, they're relatively simple things, but more to the point, it's stuff that a lot of us have been saying for years.
Yes.
Just do these
common
things.
sense things. I mean,
yes, common sense things, okay?
Pull
yourself
why is
together.
it so hard for Cyril Ramaphosa to come out and turn around and go, as the president, I think we shouldn't call for the killing of anyone. Therefore, today I'm saying that singing a song about killing farmers, singing a song about killing whites, singing a song about killing black people, chanting anything that calls for the murder of people, as the president of a inverted commas liberal democracy, I'm saying we shouldn't do that. Why is that so hard for him?
Because communists have got to commune,
Yeah. It's, look, not tough things. Here's an interesting point to make. I spoke to a good friend who is involved in this. I'm not going to mention his name. You'd recognize it, but I didn't ask him permission. But I said to him, what is your take on specifically the BE one? Because I think the priority crime one's easy.
Yes.
They could say it's a priority crime and then still ignore it, right? They could list it as a priority crime and still do nothing and say we don't have the resources. So they could. That's not hard. It doesn't require any actual effort. The not condemning, all Cyril has to do is exactly the statement I just made. That's easy, relatively easy to do. Maybe he loses a bit of social capital with the leftists, the extreme left, but that's not the end of the world. He doesn't have much social capital with them. The expropriation without compensation, that's a little bit of a harder step for them, for the ANC to take, but they could do something like, we're going to reintroduce...
John, you forget that at the point at which Cyril complies,
yes,
his hellhounds in terms of News 24 and Newsroom Africa and ENCA and all of them will very happily go along with the narrative and push it out there. And say,
Cyril's being heroic, Catherine, heroic.
Absolutely.
We all knew that expropriation with compensation, despite the 150 articles we wrote supporting it, we all knew it was terrible.
And then you'll see headlines like, "Is this the best version of Cyril yet?"
He's majestic, Catherine, majestic.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is the EWC is a little bit harder, but it can be introduced as a bill to Parliament, or an amendment. And then they can slow roll that for years if they want to. But also that will stop EWC for now because of the amendment, because any court would probably turn around and say, well, there's a parliamentary amendment, so we're going to pause any kind of expropriation until that's been decided on. That would probably occur from a legal perspective. The one that I find interesting, and the one I was asking this friend about, is BE. I said to him, interesting, because if they pull back on BE for American companies, which they may look at and say, well, okay, we'll do it for the Americans. Everyone else can just
How
get
do you
screwed.
then carve out an exception for the Americans, but not for
And that's what he
people in
said.
this country?
He said exactly that. He said the problem is once you create a carve-out, the Europeans will want to carve out. The Chinese, who probably already have a carve-out secretly, will want an official carve-out. The Russians will want to carve out. Everyone will want to carve out. And then legally, how do you say that Canthan may not have a carve-out, a citizen of the country, but every other foreigner gets a carve-out?
Well, I'll tell you what will happen in my case.
Yeah.
Okay. Because as you know, I sit on the board of a few companies, and I will immediately then register those companies in the US.
Not in Delaware, I hope.
Definitely not Delaware. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Texas. Yeah.
Sure. So I do think that and the friend basically said it's a house of cards.
Yes.
So if you make the carve out for the Americans, it's a matter of time before BE completely collapses. And it'll be interesting. My take is they're not going to do any of this. I think, I was pondering this today. We're often called Zimbabwe 2.0. People say, oh, we're going to be Zimbabwe 2.0. And it's a fundamental misunderstanding of where Zimbabwe was when what happened to them, what actually occurred in Zimbabwe, as opposed to what's going to occur here, or what the ANC would like to do here and what will likely occur. And just the position our country is in, from every perspective, financially, from an infrastructure perspective, from the intellectual capital that's here, and from the inability of anyone to move anywhere, right? Where they're going to go? Botswana, Namibia. No one's fleeing South Africa. You're going to have this trapped population. I think you can make some comparisons to Zimbabwe, but actually we're far more like Venezuela. And
it's
that
a very
is
good analogy.
That is, yes, some of the land aspects, certainly there, if you would see people moving in on farms, great documentary, side note, but great documentary made by Joe Emilio.
Yes.
Stolen Land on YouTube. Please do go watch
Absolutely. Please go and watch it.
But basically land invasions. And, if you think expropriation without compensation hasn't occurred already.
Well, to that point, we've touched on that in past discussions where we say every time there's a squatter camp that pitches up and you have no legal recourse to removing people from that land.
Yeah.
And generally because there's a plethora of NGOs that then pile on with legal support for them.
Yeah.
And you effectively pushed into bankruptcy if you want to recover it.
And you just see the property.
Yeah, so you see the property and it's gone.
But so there's some Zimbabwe comparisons, but Venezuela is where it's really at, which is that the government in that instance, and you can already make direct comparisons. The government in that instance seized the oil industry and basically kicked out the private producers and said the government now owns all of the means of production with regards to oil. We did pretty much similar things, or we're in the process of doing similar things with our greatest export, which used to be mining. And we've basically brought communism to mining, which is why mining has shrunk completely as a sector. And why nobody wants to invest in South Africa for mining. And don't tell me it's because we've run out of minerals or we don't have enticing minerals. You go look at the mining that's been going on in parts of South America, parts of Australia.
Well, it's a combination of stuff, but one of the points that kind of struck me was the fact that no new shafts have been sunk in the past 20 years.
Unbelievable.
So if you want a single indication in terms of the state of mining right now, that is the single vote of no confidence in the ability of this government to ensure profitability on the part of the mining companies. And there's been a systematic withdrawal on the part of the international mining companies from the South African market.
What's your take on, if you sink, I don't know, I don't have enough knowledge on the mining industry. If you sink a single shaft, how many jobs do you think that creates?
So the sinking of the shaft is not...
No, but I'm saying subsequent to you've sunk a shaft,
yes,
and you now are going to service that shaft and mine it. Tens of thousands?
Tens of thousands, yeah.
So we sink 10 shafts, we probably create 1 million jobs.
Correct. But remember at the same time that we've currently got among the deepest shafts in the world.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think our deepest ones currently run about 4 Ks underground. Now, in order to sink a shaft that far down underground, remember that you have to build multiple levels of elevators to take people down, because you cannot have a 4-kilometer elevator cable. All right, because what
why
happened?
not, Captain?
Well, because
no, I'm joking.
Because physics, John. John, it's because physics. Yeah, because the sheer weight of the cable then will not be able to be supported by the machinery on the ground above. So, in other words, you have to, build an elevator that goes down 100 meters. Then next to it, starting from that point, you do another one and you repeat. And it's a flippin' expensive process to go through to eventually go down and hit that seam. So it requires investment that's going to be on a 30 to 40 year time frame. And when you don't have guarantees of property rights over that 30 to 40 year time, nobody's going to put that money in.
Yeah.
And it really is as simple as that.
Well, this is the amongst the issues we have. You have no guarantee of property rights with EWC now. You have no guarantee of electricity supply. Saw a statistic the other day that Eskom now produces less electricity than they did 10 years ago. But that's not the scary statistic. The scary statistic is not that they produce less. I mean, obviously it's
the demand has fallen.
That's the scary statistic.
The issue, yes.
The fact is that we need less electricity as a country than we did 10 years ago. That means that.
Well, I think you were pointing out that we had an iron and steel corporation at one point that was actually requiring substantial amounts of electricity.
Well, we had aluminium smelters, two of them at least before COVID, that both had to shut down because of load shedding and the economic situation in the country. You know, we were an economic powerhouse, not just of Africa. The way we got into that G20 is because we were an economic powerhouse globally.
Because we were one of the G20.
That's right. Yes. We made steel. We built cars. We created things. We had a power utility that was the envy of the world.
The functional rail
functional
rail network in South Africa
was amongst the largest in the world.
Amongst the largest in the world, and more than the rest of the continent put together.
Yes, the road network equally as well, and all the engineering. It's an important aspect for me because engineers are what builds a society.
We developed Coburg ourselves. There's Pelindaba, all of the stuff that we built. Pebble bed modular reactors.
Yeah. I had this argument with someone else the other day. They told me China's just put one online, and I was like, well, it's great. They're using our technology. And then they told me, no, it's not our technology. They did it themselves. And I'm like, no, South Africa literally developed pebble bed technology.
And we just needed 10 billion at that point to take it to market, and then Zuma shut it down, and then the Chinese ended up being the beneficiaries.
Thanks, News 24. We really appreciate you losing your minds about nuclear energy. What great people you are. All right, what else is going on in the South African context? So we've got those four things. The Americans are gonna not give us an extension, I don't think. And what happens when we go back and say, sorry, we're not doing any of this?
I don't know the answer to that. And look, I think in terms of the pecking order right now, we're probably relatively low down.
Yes.
However, we must not underestimate Trump's ability to do multiple things at the same time.
Well, he threatened how many people?
No, I know. The guy is a flippant force of nature at that level. And, so...
I don't know if you saw the other day, he flew to NATO, and then in the middle of the night, basically his time, he was busy with NATO, and then he went to another meeting, and then he flew back,
and then he was back in the White House that night
and continued working. He really is phenomenal. I mean, his work ethic is quite exceptional. I think you're right. Probably low.
By the way, there's an interesting point on that apparently Trump carries a particular gene that allows him to get by with 4 hours of sleep a night. And they've actually isolated this, and what they've been trying to do now is to find ways using CRISPR technology to try and
add it into other people.
The ability to it's an interesting but I think it's fascinating that they've actually been able to isolate that. Apparently not only Trump has it, but apparently Bill Clinton has it as well.
They presume. They don't have his DNA.
No, apparently these were actually tested.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. All right. What else is going on here? We've got the DA.
Well, then there's the the DA threatening to pull out of the GNU.
My goodness.
And
the DA got their girlfriend pregnant, basically, because the DA knows how to threaten to pull out and then never do it. So basically, I just embarrassing.
It is flippin' embarrassing, and don't make threats that you're not prepared to actually carry out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean,
and really,
but isn't that one of the first principles you should know in business or politics? Is never threaten something you're not willing to carry out, because if once you can't commit, you're done. After that, no one will take you seriously. They just won't believe you. You're not a threat anymore. You've surrendered your power, and so they first.
No, you absolutely. And to go back to the Iranian context. People was saying Trump promised no more wars. I said, no, he was put in a position where if he did not launch those strikes, no one would ever take the US seriously again in that particular context. And because he actually understands the nature.
The thing is it's very clear that Cyril Ramaphosa's career as the president and a politician is over if the DA leaves the GNU. Right?
But it's also his last term, in any case.
Sure, but it's very clear to me that his career is over. And so ideas of someone like Patrice Motsepe taking over would also fall by the wayside, because I think that that's not an improbable outcome, assuming he stays in charge. But the thing is that the DA does have some power, but they've never exerted. They keep threatening. And so what ends up happening is the ANC no longer believes they would actually pull out of the GNU.
But let's talk about this thing about the DA having power. It's actually not the case. And the reason why it's not the case is I'll go back to the purported government of provincial unity that we have here in Gauteng. Okay, because remember, in terms of that particular agreement, there was supposed to be an equitable distribution of portfolios between the political parties. And essentially what you had was Lessufi refusing to play by those rules. And so the DA effectively was neutered in this province.
Well, they're out of that.
Yes, but remember that the only reason why Panyaza is in office is because of the fact that the DA voted with him. The point now is that if the DA calls a vote of no confidence in the Gauteng provincial legislature, it will not succeed. And again, if the DA does it at the level of the National Assembly, it will not succeed. So remember, in order for them to pass that vote of no confidence, they need to get 50% plus one vote.
Okay, but there's a difference between, I agree with you.
What I'm saying is that their ability to actually dismember, to unseat Ramaphosa, I don't believe they have that power.
Okay, but you're talking about a situation where they storm in and they behead the king. I agree. They don't have that power. But they do have an ability to storm in and detonate a bomb, killing everyone. Okay? And that is turning around and saying, we're no longer part of the GNU. Enjoy. Right? Good luck finding your other parties. And then we get the ANC trying to make a deal with probably the EFF or MK. And in doing so, Cyril has to go. Mashatile probably rises to power.
Well, I think you and I first spoke about this last year.
They do have the ability to do.
Yeah, you and I spoke about this last year.
Yeah.
However, at the point at which Cyril goes, will Mashatile then strike a deal with Zuma and MK? Absolutely he will. And so the position that the DA is in right now is that they either continue with Cyril being the master manipulator that he is, or they allow a Mashatile-MK alliance to then take over running the country. And that's the situation that they're in. So, to my point...
Are you defending them, or are you saying
No, I'm not defending them. I'm saying that they are a paper tiger. Their ability to actually do anything profound at this point is... their hands are completely tied.
Why would getting rid of Cyril and resulting in probably a MK-ANC coalition, why is that not a proposition?
I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but from the perspective of the DA, it's a terrible thing, because then they become completely sidelined. Remember that effectively they
only become as sidelined as they were before this last election, which is, i.e., the official opposition.
I think that the subtext that I'm hearing there is that they've become used to the trappings of power, and that they've grown used to it and they don't want to lose it. And I think that there's an element of truth in that.
I'm hearing a little bit different.
Okay.
I'm not saying that that's not true. I think that partially is true. And there's also like this partly egotistical belief that they're doing great things. So when you speak to DA insiders, they will tell you the amazing things that John is doing, for example. I got told how
Well,
incredible.
he's giving vaccines to chickens.
Well, I got told, funnily enough, how incredible he is for having brought in vaccines for cattle, for hand, foot, and mouth disease.
For chickens now.
Well, he's doing it for chickens now. But
Yes.
when I mentioned that the DA were essentially useless, this was by DA Insider. Some of the messaging I was given. One is the stuff that John's done in that regard. The other stuff is appealing to allegedly what Leon Schreiber's done, although I can't identify anything obvious on a large scale. That's what they believe. They believe they're doing great things. And the other side that seems to be clear is that there are much more influential people, specifically with regards to money, involved with the party. And the message is quite clear. Fussbait until sort of somewhere within the next election period, towards 2029, and either within the period before the election, pull out of the GNU and then campaign as the ANC's enemy, or stay in the GNU but campaign in that election and just win more, and we'll give you more money. We'll give you more money, we'll give you more support. You're the government in waiting, essentially, has been the message.
So I think if you look in terms of this national dialogue, I think effectively the end result of this national dialogue, no matter what protests you might hear from Steenhuisen right now, he's going to participate in it. And the end result of it is going to be a formalization of the structures that actually make up the current GNU. And it's going to provide a template that's going to legitimize a, shall we say, more equitable distribution of ministries based on the percentage of votes that people have to get into power.
That is very optimistic, Kenthan. I think that is huge optimism. What I get out of the national dialogue is a Hegelian dialectic, which is essentially you create a problem, then you present a solution to the problem that you created, which only worsens the problem that you created on purpose to create that problem. So they're going to go, wow, guys, look at the country. It's all messed up from communism. But they won't say that outwardly. And then they'll say, how do we fix it? And they'll have all these meetings, and they'll be broadcast on channels like ENCA and SABC, and they'll have people from the public and the community saying, oh, I'm just a poor person and I want to be able to send my children to a nice school and to a nice hospital and all these things. And then the outcome from all of that will be, we've had the national dialogue, and a whole bunch of poor people you saw on the news and who we quoted in the Mail and Guardian have said that what we really need is NHR. Oh, look, NHR. And what we really need is billable. Oh, look, billable, and so on and so forth. They won't quite word it in that way, but they'll point to that their policies are already working. But what we really need to do is we need a communism harder, Kenthan. And so we'll get NHR Plus, and we'll get Bella Plus, and we'll get EWC Plus. That's what I think will happen.
So I'm saying that they don't need a national dialogue to do that. They've already got that.
Well, they've got it, but they want it harder.
So no, I'm saying that the reason why they're bringing in this, let's just call it for what it is, a shit show.
Yeah.
Okay. So they're bringing in this shit show because, and they have this bunch of yesterday's heroes that are populating the makeup of this, and they're looking at a budget of 700 million, and is 700 million enough to buy the allegiance of all of those people to follow Ramaphosa's new vision for the type of governmental structure that he wants to carve out that's going to be acceptable to the current crop of ANC people? I think the answer to that is yes.
Yeah, that I would agree with. All right, anything else happening at home?
No, I
that
don't
you can think
so.
of?
I'm looking forward to Trump's big, beautiful bill.
Yeah, we can get back to that.
Yeah.
So it's gonna pass. Might not. July 4th is when they want it to be signed, but I don't know it's going to happen that quickly because there can still be objections and amendments and sort of delay tactics. Although it will pass, but there can be delay tactics that happen along the way. So
I say it'll pass by 4th of July.
so
I'll put money on that.
I have no feeling one way or another. I think it's possible that it could pass by the 4th.
I just want to,
but it might take 2 weeks.
So I just want to point out a couple of things, though. That so you had, Trump gets elected. Oh, panic in the market. Okay, then Trump comes in with these tariffs. Oh my God, there's panic in the market. Okay, then at every specific stage right now, everything that Trump does, there ends up being panic, panic, panic. Now, I just want to say that my U.S. portfolio is at an all-time high. Yeah. Okay, the stock market has not only resoundingly recovered from the momentary blip in terms of the tariffs. And remember, everyone who took Trump's advice at the time and said, now is a good time to buy, they ended up being, very wealthy as a result. Yeah. So once again, if you have a situation where CNN tells you it's wrong, yep. It's probably good for you. And you should probably be paying attention to it. Okay, so the interesting thing in terms of this current fallout between Musk and Trump, which I just want to touch on very briefly. Musk recognizes that the debt is something that is very likely to bring down the country. At the same time, if Trump had not actually passed this particular bill, there's a whole range of election promises that he wouldn't have been able to keep. Okay, so closing the border, effectively what this bill does is it writes into law the securing of the border. Okay, things like the 2017 tax cut that he put in place, it formalizes that and writes it into law. So again, that becomes a permanent win for him. Things like the no taxes on tips, which was an election promise that he ended up making. It lays the groundwork for that. In exchange for which, it extends the budget deficit massively. Now, you see the difference in terms of perspective that Musk has in terms of how one gets out of this mess is very different from Besant's take on it. Okay, so Besant's take on it is that there are two ways we can do this. Okay, we can either do slash costs, or we can grow revenue, in other words, grow the economy so dramatically that the debt once again goes back to manageable levels. Mm-hmm. And by every measure that I can see right now, they're on track for achieving that second way of doing it.
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely correct. I think a few things. So as we both said, we were both very pro Doge, and it's a very good idea, and it's still having effects. So I think this is the other point: is there's not as much focus on it because Elon's not in the government any longer. That's not as a result of a falling out, so to speak, but it's just because he was always going to be there for a short period. There's a lot of people who have remained. The way Doge works is that those people identify in each department areas of wastage, and they raise it to the cabinet secretary of that department. So, for example, USAID was brought to the attention of Marco Rubio, and they said, we are spending X number of billions on USAID annually. This is what we get in return for it, i.e. nothing. What do you want to do with it? And then the cabinet secretary can say, I want to do something, I want to do nothing, I want to, partially.
Shut it down in the case of
whatever.
Yes.
Sure. So that is an ongoing thing. The thing I think people need to understand is that those areas where America's spending billions, tens of billions, even hundreds of billions in some instances, is not enough to bring the deficit under control. Okay? Because the difference between $1 billion and $1 trillion is insane. In fact, I can't remember the exact figure, but if you can ask ChatGPT or something to do this for you, but ask it to differentiate between 1 second, 100 seconds, 1 million seconds, 1 billion seconds, and 1 trillion seconds in terms of how long you would have to travel at a car at 100 kilometers an hour, for example. And you'll see that, the difference between 1 million and 1 billion is 1 million is a couple of days, and a billion is hundreds of years, and 1 trillion will end up being hundreds of thousands of years, or something to that effect. The reality is that America's problem, like many countries who've gone down this route, is entitlements, social security. And the thing people complain about in this country, grants. Okay. And the problem is that you can't really take those entitlements from people very easily. Number one, because no one's voting to have their money taken away from them. So if you paid social security your entire working life, you're now 60 years old, and the Congress decides, or the president or whoever decides, hey, we actually want to take away some of what you paid for over time because we can't afford it, because we overspent.
But you see, again, the problem that you have in terms of the way in which the Social Security framework was structured is that you as a worker in the US, you pay into the Social Security Fund, and it's effectively meant to be something that sustains you in your old age. But the way in which that money gets used effectively becomes an extension of the US Treasury.
That's right.
And your investments are limited to being put into US Treasuries. And if all of the money that is being put into Social Security had simply been invested in the S&P 500,
we'd be fine.
Over the past 20 years, we would not be having this discussion right now.
Right. So, but the point is that you cannot solve the deficit by getting rid of expenditure. You've got to get rid of entitlements, that expenditure. And there's no way you can do that, because you might try, and every single member of Congress that votes for that will lose their next election.
Sure. But what you can do is you can actually freeze it at this particular point and start building systems that are going to be adjunct to that.
Yes. That
are then going to actually be profitable in the long term. And Norway gets away with it because they have a sovereign wealth fund. The Australians have something very similar. So the Australian equivalent of Social Security actually runs at a huge profit, which is one of the few things that the Australians actually get right. Can't play sport for shit. But that aside,
not necessary, Catherine. We might have a few viewers or listeners. Yeah.
So I think if you look in terms of what's happening right now around the U.S. economy, the tariffs are working. Okay, there's been a net inflow of capital into the U.S., and guess what? Prices have not gone up. And there's been a real uptick in terms of wages for the working class.
So two things. Okay, so we made the entitlements thing, and so the idea of Elon going, well, we just need to cut expenditure, it doesn't really work that way. Okay, and I think for me the problem Elon doesn't understand is Elon's an autocrat. That's how he runs his businesses. When he comes into SpaceX, he says, I want the rocket to do this. And if someone says no, they get fired until he finds someone who says yes and does it for him. Okay? The way he wants it. And so he doesn't understand why he can't come into government and just go, well, we're spending 4 trillion too much, or 6 trillion too much in this case, I think it is. Just stop doing that. You can't do that in government. And in politics, with this big, beautiful bill, inverted commas, what's happened is there's some good stuff in there, the stuff you've mentioned, and there's some crap as well.
There's a massive amount of crap.
But the reason that happens is to get the bill, any bill, over the line.
Yes.
You have
and as it is, he just barely scraped over the line in the Senate.
Yes. He needed JD to break the tie.
Yes.
And so you've got to give everyone a little bit of something, and you've got to make compromises. And Elon is not a compromise guy. So he doesn't get it, right? And I understand why he doesn't get it, but Trump gets it. Trump gets it, and he's got a bigger picture in mind. Now, I want to point something out that the comment you made, which is the growth of the economy. The US debt is about 34 trillion, somewhere in the ballpark. The American economy annually, the GDP is about 30 trillion. So if you grow the American economy by 20%, that will take it from 30 trillion economy to a $36 trillion economy, all right? And so you can see how very quickly with good growth, you can wipe out the debt, as you mentioned.
Well, it's the single biggest argument that we've been making for getting rid of BEE and all of the regulations that hold us back in this country. Because if you go back to the Mbeki era, we paid back the national debt. And then the 20% savings that we had, which was all profit at that point, we put into social grants. And guess what? The country actually had the longest run of economic growth in its entire history. And suddenly,
there's also an argument about the structure of debt here, which is, the idea is well, America's going to go bankrupt. Can I give everyone, I don't know, good news, bad news, whatever? America's never going bankrupt. Why? Because if anyone calls America on their debt and they can't afford to pay it, then that country and everyone else also goes out of business. If America goes bankrupt, everyone, the whole idea of too big to fail, the banks that were too big to fail, America is the country that is too big to fail. And so, yes, it's not good to have debt like that, and it's not good to have to service debt, but they're not servicing all that debt. They're not like us. They don't have loans from the IMF. Those are government bonds, that debt. Okay, so they're not getting a bill every month or annually to service that debt. It's a different type of debt. And unless China, for example, calls $10 trillion of debt.
And they're not going to do that.
And they won't do it because the entire global economy would collapse, including China. And so, this debate is obviously it's not good to have that debt, but the way Elon frames it, in my opinion, is not right. But I will say there was something very insightful that he posted. I don't think he intended to kind of give this level of insight, or he realized how people might read into it. But he's been very busy on X the last few days, very anti the bill and trying to stop it, which he's not going to do. He's not going to achieve that. He claims he's going to start a third party and try to get everyone who voted for it out of Congress. But and that will fail as well. We can discuss why. But he's been replying to people and commenting on things. And one of the things he replied was, if America goes bankrupt, how are we going to get to Mars? And I just looked at that and I was like, okay, I get it. Your life goal, the thing you want to achieve is it doesn't matter what else happens. Even going and doing Doge had nothing to do with saving the government in and of itself money. You wanted to save the government money so that the government would ultimately have enough money to fund basically human spaceflight and a setup of a colony on Mars.
No,
I get it.
No. He's not asking the government to fund that.
Well, there is some funding towards that. So, for example, in the bill, there's $10 billion, I think. Not much, but $10 billion worth of funding for a mission to Mars. So there will be some NASA collab there of some sort. I get it. Some of it's being self-funded. But the point is that that's his goal. And he believes that if America falls, that goal won't be achieved. Okay, and so I get it. But at the same time, there's a waitress in Idaho who doesn't want to pay, who's struggling to get by, and if she didn't pay tax on her tips, she wouldn't struggle as much. All right? And turns out she doesn't care much about going to Mars. She's just trying to pay her rent. And I think that's a blind spot of Elon, and maybe is a nice
not only
link
that,
back to the discussion we had about billionaires
if Trump had not passed this bill at this point, then by the end of the year, there would have been an effective tax increase of 2,000 Rand.
Dollars.
$2,000 per taxpayer.
Yeah.
Would have been the net effect.
From his tax cuts in 2017, I think. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so interesting. It's going to pass. I think it's very important for his agenda. And look, if they're going to win the midterms, which it's hard to do, as a sort of in between election between two presidentials, usually the opposite party wins those traditionally for the last several decades. This is his best bet.
Yes.
It's his best bet because it funds all of his campaign promises. It allows him to do things. I don't think he's taken his eye off the ball in terms of balancing the budget. I just think he's prioritizing certain other things.
But I also think that he trusts Besson's view that he can actually
grow the economy.
Yeah.
All right. Shall we call it quits?
Yeah, we can call it quits. I think. So if the bill passes on Friday, then lunch is on you.
I don't know. You just keep making this shit up. Fine.
I don't have any book launches to announce this week, but
Do we need to set that in? I think we need to set that in stone at the end. I didn't want to make this bet, Kenthan. I think it might pass on Friday, but it might not. I'm not that stuck to it. But I'll give it to you. Fine, you can have that. It's going to pass on July the 4th. Eh?
Yeah. So if it doesn't pass on July 4th, then I buy you lunch. If it does pass, you buy me lunch.
All right, but we discussed how lunch isn't really a bet.
I know, but I mean, yeah. You're going away, aren't you?
Yeah, just for 2 days. 2 days coming up, and you're also going away for a week, I think.
Yeah, it's a week and a bit. It's another epic road trip. So I'm going to Fontaine, halfway between Langsburg and Ladysmith. Ladysmith with an I, not with a Y.
Yeah.
And so it'll be a couple of days there, and then across to Plet, hoping to catch up with some of the Bitcoin bros while I'm there. And
is that who goes to Plet?
You chuckle at this. So there's a couple of places in the world where there's been systematic moves on the parts of communities to get off grid in terms of finance and to make use of effectively Bitcoin and the Lightning Network in order to transact. And there's a couple of places in the Western Cape right now that are kind of high up there in terms of global rankings of people who are now effectively transacting in Bitcoin. So Plet is one of them.
Yeah.
And the other is a place called Witstrand.
Where's that? And who's got billions of rands in Bitcoin there?
It's not billions of rands. It's just that people making use. So remember, right now you can go into Pick and Pay and you can buy your groceries using Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So it's people who are using Bitcoin as a transactional medium. Well, the interesting thing about that is that if you start using Bitcoin as a transactional medium, it's out of the Sars tax net.
For now.
But more to the point, how does SARS get into the process of preventing two individuals from exchanging Bitcoin?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's that difficult in the sense that actually Bitcoin, everything is in the ledger, right? So the reality is this whole idea that's always been, well, you can't, it could be used by terrorists and all this stuff. It's always been nonsense to me because you can see the money moving. The problem is you don't necessarily know who owns the wallets.
Thank you. That's the point.
But you can see all the money moving. You can see every Bitcoin that's ever been transacted.
You can see all the money moving, and more to the point then, if you're not able to trace it back to the people who actually made the transaction in the first place. And look, frankly, are you going to be chasing down for everyone who's buying a pizza with fractions of a Bitcoin? Just simply, and of course, it all adds up in terms of the tax net. But I think, are we getting to the point where people are increasingly going to opt out of the formal financial systems just simply to avoid a situation where they see taxes being poured down a sinkhole and enriching the communist overlords? I think that yes. We've already seen the uptick.
You do say that, but I saw the other day that SARS collected an extra almost 13 billion rand, I think, as a result of the two-pot system that they put into place, which was a way of robbing people of their pensions. So a whole bunch of people have got some money now, but what they will find is when they retire in 15 to 20 years' time, is that they won't have much left over.
This stuff is
criminal.
It's more than criminal. I think it's fucking obscene. And I view this stuff in exactly the same way as the fact that the ANC made gambling so accessible to the masses. And you consider the sheer size of the gambling market in South Africa right now.
Terrible.
And it's entirely extractive. It adds no value to people's lives. It leads to the destruction of social fabric.
It's not even adding jobs at the moment because it's all online.
Yes.
Yeah. So there really is no value add from it. And I've noticed that the betting agencies, I suppose, and online casinos are now, they're as wealthy as Vodacom and MTN were in 2000.
Yeah.
Because every bit of advertising, all the sports paraphernalia and sponsorship is all those companies.
You're normalizing this stuff, and it's to the detriment of the country. And I don't see how we claw our way out of it. That
Yeah.
particular thing. I mean, that is going to get a lot worse.
So you're not libertarian on gambling?
I'm not libertarian on gambling.
Yeah, I don't think I am either. I do think there's a net evil there, and it's as you say, it just doesn't provide a value. There's no real motivation for it to be an entertainment factor. I think the arguments could have been made at places like Sun City, where you had to drive to a specific place for
sure,
for a
yes.
weekend, you know.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can blow your entire salary through a couple of clicks on your cell phone in the afternoon after you receive it seems to me to be a terrible idea.
Yes, and so the other thing that I'm not libertarian about is the fact that you have unsecured access to porn sites for youngsters, which...
But it asks you to click if you're 18, Captain.
Yes, I know it asks you to click if you're 18, but again, it's one of those things where so courts in the US have now passed a law that requires that you do age verification, and look, there's the flip side of that it means that your identity does end up becoming exposed, and do I think that trade-off in this particular case is actually worth it? Yes, I do. Does it go against my libertarian soul? Absolutely, it does. But hey, we got to have stuff that we're hypocritical about. I mean,
it's hard on the moral questions. It's quite a difficult. It's a difficult debate, and the principles are nice, but they don't always work when you put them into practice, and they become more complex across large populations like South Africa, and the gambling one, where you have a relatively poorly educated populace who are not particularly wealthy on average. We've got a particularly poor population on average, and even of the people who earn money, those people can't afford to spend thousands, for example, on gambling. And to make it as easily as accessible as we have to a population that may not be able to sort of consider the real effects of what's happening until it's too late. And I don't want to take agency from anyone.
Yeah.
But, the reason we protect kids from pornography is because we realize that they can't interpret that information properly. Can a 19-year-old who's gambling away their salary that they just earned from their construction site job really rationalize that either on their phone by pressing a couple of buttons and not getting the right so-called flip of a slot machine, a digital slot machine or something like that? I don't know. I've never played these online gambling things. I assume poker and blackjack and all the rest is there. But yeah, it's definitely a complex thing. Not as simple as I think everyone should have all the freedoms. All right, an interesting one to end. Some good debate there. Thank you as always. And thanks to everyone.
Like, subscribe, all of those things.
There you go. Camden said it this time. Thank goodness. Now I don't have to. Like, subscribe, comment, share, and we will obviously catch you next time. To the subscribers, you can expect that money back in your account anytime from now. Catch you next time. Cheers.